The sun had just begun to rise over the city, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. Maya Johnson parked her car in the lot of a small convenience store, a place she frequented for a quick cup of coffee before heading to work. Today was no ordinary day. She had spent weeks preparing for a high-profile case involving a wrongful eviction that had left dozens of families homeless. Her dedication to justice had made her a well-known figure in the legal community, and this case was personal to her. Maya stepped out of her sleek black sedan, her navy blue suit pristine and pressed, her white blouse tucked in neatly. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement as she approached the store, her leather briefcase in hand. She was the picture of professionalism and confidence, a woman who had fought hard to earn her place in a world that often tried to deny her. Inside the store, she greeted the cashier with a polite smile and headed straight for the coffee machine. She added her usual, 2 sugars, a splash of cream, and took a moment to glance at her phone. The courthouse was only a 10-minute drive away, and she still had time to review her notes before the hearing. As she exited the store, the sound of her heels echoed against the early morning quiet. She didn't notice the police cruiser parked a few spaces away, its engine idling. Officer Brad Sullivan, a burly man with a sharp crew cut and a permanent scowl, sat inside, his eyes scanning the parking lot like a predator searching for prey. His gaze landed on Maya, and something about her, her confidence, her presence, seemed to trigger him. Maya reached her car and placed her coffee on the roof as she searched for her keys. That's when she heard it. A voice sharp and commanding. "Ma'am, stop right there." She turned to see Sullivan approaching, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. His tone was not one of inquiry but accusation, a voice that expected compliance without question. "Can I help you, officer?" Maya asked, her voice calm but firm. She had dealt with people like him before. Men who mistook her composure for weakness, her professionalism for arrogance. "We've had a report of a robbery in the area," Sullivan said, his eyes narrowing as he looked her up and down. "You match the description." Maya blinked, surprised. "A robbery? I think you've got the wrong person." Sullivan's face hardened. "Let me be the judge of that. What are you doing here?" "Getting coffee," she replied, holding up the cup as evidence. "I'm a lawyer. I'm on my way to court." He didn't seem to hear her, or he didn't care. "ID now." Maya sighed and set her briefcase on the car's hood, opening it to retrieve her wallet. "I'm happy to comply, officer, but this is a misunderstanding." As she handed him her ID, Sullivan barely glanced at it before tossing it back to her. "Where were you before this?" "At home, preparing for a case," she replied, irritation creeping into her voice. "Look, I have no idea what you're insinuating, but—" "Hands where I can see them," Sullivan barked, cutting her off. Maya's eyes widened. "Excuse me. You heard me. Hands on the car." The situation escalated faster than she could process. Sullivan grabbed her arm and spun her around, pressing her hands against the car's cool metal surface. The coffee cup fell, spilling its contents onto the ground. "This is unnecessary," Maya protested, struggling against his grip. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Quiet," Sullivan growled, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You're coming with me." By now, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Some people recorded the scene with their phones, their voices a mix of outrage and disbelief. "Why are you arresting her?" "She didn't do anything," a woman shouted. "Yeah, leave her alone," a man added, his phone held high to capture Sullivan's aggressive behavior. Maya glanced over her shoulder, her heart pounding. She had spent her career fighting for justice, and now she found herself on the other side of the law, humiliated and powerless. "Officer," she said, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her, "I'm a state lawyer." "This is a mistake." Sullivan smirked. "Sure you are. Let's see what the station has to say about that." The drive to the station felt like an eternity. Maya sat in the back of the cruiser, her wrists aching from the cuffs. She stared out the window, her mind racing. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong, but she also knew how these situations often played out for people who looked like her. At the station, Sullivan paraded her through the precinct like a trophy, his colleagues barely glancing up from their desks. Maya kept her head high, refusing to let the shame overwhelm her. She knew her rights, and she knew she would fight this. As they reached the booking area, Sullivan shoved her into a chair. "Sit tight," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Maya met his gaze, her eyes blazing. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The words hung in the air, a quiet promise of the storm to come. The station was as cold and unwelcoming as Maya expected. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the scratched metal desk where she was made to sit. The smell of stale coffee and disinfectant lingered in the air, but the atmosphere was far worse, thick with indifference and hostility. Maya could feel the eyes of the officers on her, glancing over occasionally before returning to their paperwork or casual conversations, as though detaining an innocent woman was just another part of their routine. She straightened her back, refusing to let her discomfort show. Her wrists throbbed from the tight handcuffs, but she maintained her composure. She wouldn't give Officer Sullivan or anyone else in this precinct the satisfaction of seeing her vulnerable. Instead, she let her silence speak volumes, a calm but unyielding presence in the middle of their chaos. Sullivan leaned against the counter, his smugness practically oozing out of him as he filled out the paperwork for her arrest. He looked over at Maya occasionally, clearly enjoying the power he thought he held. His voice carried through the room as he spoke to a younger officer behind the desk. "Got myself a real troublemaker this morning," Sullivan said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Says she's a lawyer. Can you believe that?" The younger officer, a rookie by the looks of him, glanced nervously at Maya and then back at Sullivan. Did you check her ID? Like, verify it?" Sullivan smirked, waving the question off. "What's to verify? She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Fits the description. That's all I need to know." Maya exhaled slowly, biting back her anger. She'd seen this behavior before, too many times to count. Men like Sullivan thrived on power trips, weaponizing their authority against people they thought wouldn't fight back. But he had miscalculated. This time, he had picked the wrong person. "Officer Sullivan," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. It was calm, measured, and filled with the authority of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "I demand to speak to your commanding officer. Now." Sullivan turned to her, his smug expression faltering slightly. "You're not in a position to demand anything," he said, though there was an edge of uncertainty in his tone. Maya leaned forward, her eyes locked onto his. "Oh, I think I am. When you unlawfully detain a state lawyer, you open yourself and your department to a legal nightmare. Trust me, Officer Sullivan, you don't want to go down this road." The room grew quiet, the other officers now paying attention. Sullivan hesitated, his bravado cracking as doubt crept in. Before he could respond, the rookie officer spoke up again, his voice timid but insistent. "Brad, maybe we should, check her ID. Just to be safe." Sullivan shot him a glare but reluctantly pulled Maya's ID from his pocket. He walked over to the computer, muttering under his breath, and typed in her information. The room was silent except for the faint clicking of keys and the buzz of the overhead lights. Then, as the screen loaded, Sullivan's face drained of color. There it was, clear as day. Maya Johnson, State Prosecutor, Office of the Attorney General. He quickly closed the window, hoping no one else had seen it. But Maya had been watching him closely, and the flicker of panic in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. "You're starting to realize your mistake, aren't you?" she said, her tone cool but razor-sharp. "It's not too late to fix this. Call your commanding officer." Sullivan didn't respond, his jaw tightening. The rookie officer, emboldened by the tension, tried again. "Seriously, Brad, this could get bad. Maybe we should." "Shut it, rookie," Sullivan snapped, his voice louder than he intended. The outburst drew even more attention, and the room seemed to shift, the balance of power tilting ever so slightly in Maya's favor. Minutes later, the commanding officer arrived. Captain Ramirez, a grizzled man with a stern face and a no-nonsense demeanor, walked into the room, his presence immediately commanding respect. He looked at Sullivan, then at Maya, his sharp eyes assessing the situation. "What's going on here, Officer Sullivan?" Ramirez asked, his tone curt. Sullivan hesitated, fumbling for words. We had a report of a robbery, and she fit the description, so I—" "She's a state lawyer," Ramirez interrupted, his voice cutting through Sullivan's excuses. He turned to Maya, his expression softening. "Miss Johnson, I'm Captain Ramirez. I deeply regret this incident. I assure you, we'll get this sorted out immediately." Maya stood, her back straight, her eyes steady. "Thank you, Captain." But this isn't just about me. It's about accountability. I was humiliated and unlawfully detained. I expect a full investigation into this officer's conduct. Ramirez nodded, his jaw tightening as he turned to Sullivan. Remove the handcuffs. Now. Sullivan hesitated, his face a mixture of anger and humiliation, but he obeyed. The cuffs clicked open, and Maya rubbed her wrists, the sting of the metal replaced by a burning resolve. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As she was escorted to a private office to file her complaint, her phone buzzed with notifications. She glanced at the screen and saw dozens of messages, along with a video that was already going viral. The clip of her arrest had been shared across social media, sparking outrage and calls for justice. Outside the station, a small crowd had begun to gather, holding signs and chanting for accountability. Maya looked out the window, watching the scene unfold. She felt a spark of hope amidst the frustration and anger. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something much bigger. And she was ready to fight. If stories like this inspire you, challenge you, or make you think, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. Together, we can shine a light on injustice and demand change. Let's make a difference. The air was heavy with a mix of exhaustion and determination as Maya sat in her car, parked just outside the precinct. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The events of the morning replayed in her mind like a bad movie. Officer Sullivan's sneering face, the cold bite of handcuffs on her wrists, and the humiliation of being paraded through the station as though she were a common criminal. She glanced at her phone on the passenger seat, buzzing non-stop with notifications. Social media was ablaze. The video of her arrest had spread like wildfire, garnering thousands of views in just a few hours. Comments poured in, some expressing outrage, others offering support, and a few vile enough to remind her of the ugliness she was up against. But amidst the chaos, one thing became crystal clear. She couldn't let this slide. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everyone who had ever been humiliated, profiled, or dismissed simply because of the color of their skin. This was about justice, and justice was Maya Johnson's calling. Starting the car, she drove straight to her office. The usually comforting space now felt charged with a new energy. She set her briefcase down, kicked off her heels, and sat at her desk, pulling out a legal pad. Her sharp mind, trained to dissect every detail, went to work. She wrote down everything she could remember about the arrest, the officer's words, his actions, his tone. Every detail mattered. Every detail was a weapon she could use. Her office door swung open, and Carla, her assistant, walked in, her face pale with a mix of concern and anger. "Maya, I saw the video," she said, holding her phone. "Are you okay?" Maya leaned back in her chair, her eyes still blazing with focus. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice carried a razor-sharp edge. "But Sullivan and his department aren't going to be." Carla placed a cup of steaming tea on the desk and crossed her arms. "You're going after them, aren't you?" Maya smirked, a fire lighting up her features. "You bet I am." For the next several hours, Maya worked tirelessly. She reached out to the people who had recorded her arrest, tracking down witnesses willing to speak on record. Many were eager to help, their voices tinged with disbelief and outrage. "I saw everything," said one woman over the phone. "You didn't do anything wrong. That cop, he was out of control." Another witness, an older man who had filmed the entire incident, sent her the full, unedited video. Maya watched it in silence, her jaw tightening as the scene unfolded on her screen. Seeing herself being cuffed, hearing Sullivan's derisive tone, it only fueled her determination. This wasn't going to be buried under excuses and paperwork. As Maya pieced together the story, she began to dig deeper into Sullivan's background. With her connections in the legal community, she managed to pull up internal complaints filed against him. Her heart sank as she read through the records. Multiple allegations of racial profiling, excessive force, and even verbal abuse. Yet, somehow, every complaint had been quietly dismissed. Sullivan was protected by the same system he abused. "What a surprise," she muttered under her breath, flipping through the files. "They let him get away with this for years." Carla returned, carrying a folder. "Maya, you need to see this," she said, setting it on the desk. Inside were anonymous reports from officers at the same precinct. One described Sullivan as a ticking time bomb, while another admitted, "Everyone knows he's a problem, but no one wants to deal with it." Maya closed the folder, her jaw clenched. This isn't just about Sullivan. This is about the system that let him run wild. And I'm going to take it all down. She drafted a formal complaint against Sullivan and the precinct, outlining every violation of her rights and every piece of evidence she had uncovered. But Maya wasn't stopping there. She decided to file a civil rights lawsuit, knowing full well the battle it would spark. Her phone rang, breaking her concentration. It was a reporter from a major news network. "Ms. Johnson, we've seen the video, and we'd like to feature your story. Would you be willing to speak on record?" Maya hesitated, weighing her options. Speaking out would put her in the spotlight, but it would also amplify her message. She couldn't afford to stay silent. "I'll do it," she said. "But this isn't just about me. It's about holding the entire system accountable." As word of her lawsuit spread, so did the backlash. The police union issued a statement defending Sullivan, claiming he had acted in good faith. Online trolls flooded her social media with hateful comments, accusing her of lying or playing the victim. But Maya wasn't deterred. If anything, the opposition only strengthened her resolve. Late one evening, as she pored over the case files in her office, her phone pinged with a new email. It was from a whistleblower, an officer from the same precinct. The subject line read, "I'm ready to talk." Maya opened the email, her heart racing as she read the detailed account. The officer confirmed what she already knew. The precinct was rotten to its core, with a culture of protecting its worst offenders. It was the kind of evidence that could turn her case into a landmark moment. She leaned back in her chair, a small determined smile playing on her lips. The pieces were falling into place. The next morning, Maya stood in front of a crowd at a community rally. Activists, supporters, and even some witnesses from her arrest had gathered to demand justice. Maya stepped up to the microphone, her voice clear and steady. "This isn't just about one officer or one incident," she said. "This is about a system that allows people like Officer Sullivan to abuse their power without consequence. But we have the power to change that. Together, we can make sure this never happens again." The crowd erupted in applause, their energy washing over her like a wave. As she stepped down, she felt the weight of the fight ahead, but she knew she wasn't alone. Justice was coming, and Maya was leading the charge. If this story inspires you and makes you want to stand up for justice, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. Together, we can shine a light on injustice and fight for a better future. Stay tuned for what happens next. The courthouse loomed ahead, its tall columns casting long shadows across the bustling street. Maya climbed the wide steps with purpose, her every step a reminder of why she was here. Outside, the air buzzed with tension. Protesters gathered with signs demanding justice, their chants echoing in the distance. Reporters lined the entrance, cameras flashing, and microphones ready to capture her every move. Maya didn't falter. Her face was calm, her posture steady, though the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on her. Inside, the courtroom was packed. The gallery was filled with spectators, activists who had rallied behind her cause, supporters from her community, and those curious to see how this case would unfold. At the defense table sat Officer Brad Sullivan, his face a mask of feigned indifference. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering something, but Sullivan's eyes flickered briefly toward Maya. She didn't look at him. Her focus was singular, and her resolve unshakable. As the judge entered and the room rose to attention, the proceedings began. Sullivan's lawyer wasted no time presenting their narrative. With polished confidence, he painted a picture of his client as a dedicated officer who had acted in a chaotic situation, doing what he believed was right. He described Maya's arrest as an unfortunate misunderstanding, an error born of urgency, not malice. Maya listened intently, her face betraying no emotion. She had heard these excuses before, the well-rehearsed lines that sought to humanize the aggressor while erasing the victim. But she was ready to dismantle their story piece by piece. When it was her turn to present her case, Maya rose from her seat with the quiet authority of someone who knew the truth was on her side. "This case is not about an honest mistake," she began, her voice steady and clear. "It is about the abuse of power. It is about a system that allows officers like Brad Sullivan to act without accountability. What happened to me was not an accident. It was deliberate. It was wrong." The room was silent as her words sank in. Maya called her first witness, a young woman who had filmed the arrest. The woman was nervous as she took the stand, but her determination to tell the truth was evident. She described the events of that morning, her voice trembling slightly as she recalled the way Sullivan had grabbed Maya, the way he dismissed her calm protests. She wasn't doing anything wrong, the witness said, her hands gripping the edge of the stand. She was just standing by her car when he came at her. It didn't feel right. The defense attorney tried to discredit her, suggesting she had recorded the video for attention. But Maya calmly rose, redirecting the narrative. "Why did you start recording that morning?" she asked. The witness hesitated for a moment before answering. "Because I've seen this happen before. I've seen people get treated unfairly, and I wanted to make sure there was proof." Maya turned to the jury. "Sometimes, proof is the only weapon we have against injustice," she said, her voice firm. Next, Maya presented the unedited video footage. The courtroom watched in silence as the events of that morning unfolded on the screen. The video showed everything: the calm dignity with which Maya tried to explain herself, Sullivan's aggressive tone, the way he snapped the handcuffs onto her wrists. It was all there, undeniable and damning. The jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the weight of what they were seeing written across their faces. The turning point came when Maya called her most important witness, a whistleblower from Sullivan's own precinct. The officer, his identity protected, testified about the culture of misconduct within the department. His voice was steady, his words cutting. "Sullivan has a reputation," he said. "This isn't the first time he's been accused of something like this. Complaints are filed, but nothing happens. The department protects its own." Gasps rippled through the gallery as Maya presented the records of those complaints. Dozens of them, each detailing instances of racial profiling and excessive force, all ignored. Maya turned to the jury. "This isn't just about one officer," she said. "This is about a system that allows officers like him to act without accountability." Finally, Maya took the stand herself. She recounted the events of her arrest, her voice unwavering as she described the humiliation and fear she had felt. "I've spent my career fighting for justice," she said, her eyes meeting the jurors. "And on that morning, I was reminded of how far we still have to go. But this isn't just about me. This is about making sure no one else has to endure what I did." Her closing argument was a powerful crescendo. She stood before the jury, her presence commanding, her voice ringing out with conviction. "This case is about accountability. It's about the trust we place in those who are supposed to protect us and what happens when that trust is broken. You've seen the evidence. You've heard the truth. Now the choice is yours. Will you uphold the status quo, or will you take a stand for justice?" When she finished, the room was silent. Even Sullivan seemed subdued, his earlier bravado replaced by unease. The jury deliberated for hours, but when they returned, the decision was unanimous. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Maya Johnson," the foreperson announced. A wave of relief washed over Maya as the words sank in. The gallery erupted in murmurs of approval, and Maya allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The judge ordered Sullivan's dismissal and mandated sweeping reforms within the precinct. Maya was awarded a financial settlement, but she had already decided to donate the money to organizations fighting for systemic change. Outside the courthouse, the crowd was waiting. As Maya stepped onto the steps, cheers erupted. Microphones were thrust toward her, but she raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "This isn't just my victory," she said, her voice carrying over the noise. "This is a victory for everyone who has ever been silenced, ignored, or mistreated. But the fight isn't over. It's just beginning." The chants grew louder as Maya descended the steps, her head held high. For her, this was more than a personal triumph. It was a step toward a future where justice wasn't just a promise, it was a reality. If this story inspires you to stand against injustice, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories of courage and resilience. Together, we can make a difference. Let's fight for a better tomorrow. The courthouse was nearly empty now, the voices of protesters and reporters fading as the last few people trickled out. Maya stood on the wide stone steps, taking in the moment. The cold evening air nipped at her skin, but she barely noticed. For the first time in weeks, the tension in her shoulders began to ease. She had won. Justice had been served, and the weight of that victory pressed on her in ways she hadn't anticipated. This was more than a personal triumph. It was a turning point for many who had suffered silently, their voices ignored by a system designed to protect the powerful. As she descended the steps, her phone buzzed constantly with calls, messages, and social media notifications. The video of her victory had gone viral, sparking conversations across the nation. She exchanged brief smiles and thank yous with those who lingered, supporters who had been there from the beginning. They called her a hero, a symbol of hope, but Maya knew better. She wasn't a hero, she was a fighter, and the fight wasn't over. The days that followed were a blur of interviews, meetings, and endless messages of support. Every major news outlet wanted her on their program, and while Maya typically preferred to let her work speak for itself, she knew the importance of using this moment to amplify her message. In one particularly poignant interview, she sat opposite a seasoned journalist who asked her what this victory meant to her personally. "This isn't just about me," Maya replied, her tone measured but firm. "It's about creating a system where justice isn't reserved for the privileged, where accountability is more than just a word. Today was a step forward, but we still have so much work to do." Meanwhile, the precinct where Officer Sullivan had worked felt the full weight of the court's decision. Sullivan's dismissal was immediate, but the reforms ordered by the judge would take months to implement. Other officers began to come forward, emboldened by Maya's case, sharing stories of misconduct and corruption within the department. The cracks in the system, once hidden, were now impossible to ignore. Late one evening, Maya sat in her small home office, the chaos of the day finally giving way to quiet. Her desk was cluttered with files, notebooks, and her laptop, but her attention was fixed on a photo frame in her hands. It was an old picture of her parents, their smiles bright with pride. They had always taught her that doing the right thing was rarely easy, but it was always worth it. "I hope I've made you proud," she whispered, her voice soft in the stillness. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone vibrating on the desk. She reached for it and saw Carla's name on the screen. Maya smiled as she answered. "Hey, Carla." "Maya, the community center just called," Carla said, her voice bright with excitement. "They want you to speak at their next event. They're hosting a panel on systemic reform, and they think you'd be the perfect keynote speaker." Maya leaned back in her chair, a small smile spreading across her face. "Tell them I'd be honored." A week later, Maya stood before a packed auditorium, the crowd buzzing with energy. Students, activists, community leaders, and curious onlookers filled the seats, their faces turned toward her with anticipation. As she approached the podium, the noise settled into an expectant hush. She took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the edges of her prepared notes, though she didn't need them. The words were etched into her heart. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she began, her voice steady and clear. "It's a series of small victories, of people coming together to demand better. My case wasn't just about me. It was about the witnesses who spoke up, the community that rallied behind me, and the countless voices that refused to let injustice go unnoticed. That's what real power looks like." The crowd erupted into applause, their energy washing over her. She smiled, feeling the weight of their support and the possibilities it represented. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was theirs, too. As the event ended, a young woman approached her, clutching a notebook tightly against her chest. Her eyes were bright with admiration but tinged with nerves. "Miss Johnson," she began hesitantly, "I'm studying law because of you. Watching you fight for what's right. It showed me that I can make a difference too." Maya's chest tightened with emotion. She placed a reassuring hand on the woman's shoulder. "You already are," she said warmly. "Remember, justice isn't a destination. It's a journey. And it's people like you who will keep us moving forward." Months later, Maya found herself back in the same courtroom where she had faced Sullivan. This time, she wasn't the plaintiff but the legal counsel for a young man wrongfully accused of theft. The case was eerily similar to her own, and the irony wasn't lost on her. As she stood before the jury, she felt the same fire she had carried throughout her battle for justice. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice ringing with conviction, "justice is not about convenience. It's about truth. And today, we're here to uncover that truth." The courtroom was silent, all eyes fixed on her. The fight was far from over, but Maya wasn't afraid. She had found her voice, her purpose, and her strength. This was who she was, and she wasn't stopping anytime soon. If Maya's journey inspires you to stand against injustice and fight for what's right, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories of courage, resilience, and change. Together, we can demand accountability and create a better world. Stay tuned for more stories like this one.